We recorded this interview with Kevin Kelly back in March of 2023 to celebrate the release of his newly published book, Excellent Advice for Living: Wisdom I Wish I'd Known Earlier. During our conversation, we explored the topic of the current technology landscape, which has been at the core of Kelly's thinking. As the founding editor of Wired magazine, Kelly has established himself as a leading technology thinker. Additionally, he's an accomplished author of several best-selling books and a talented photographer. Excellent Advice for Living is a remarkable book that effectively captures Kelly's profound wisdom and distills his life experiences into concise nuggets of guidance. We thoroughly enjoyed reading the book, and our conversation with Kelly proved to be an equally rewarding exchange of ideas.
Perhaps it's nice to start with the question, if you remember, what is your earliest memory about technology, because you have been in this field for so long.
Well, I might answer that differently now because now I have a different view of technology. I understand that it's not just the stuff that was invented after we were born, which is what people normally think of as technology, is all the recent new stuff. But of course, we're surrounded by mostly old technology, plumbing, electrical, concrete, cars. That's so most of the technology around us is old stuff. Um, so my answer now, of course, is that uh, my bicycle was technology. But in the way you're probably using it is you mean just the recent things, the new stuff that doesn't quite work yet. That's what people mean by technology, is the stuff that doesn't work yet. So when was I first aware of the stuff not working yet? Um, I would say my dad took me to a computer show in 1965.
Oh, and how was the setup there? I imagine that was very.
Well, it was very, very boring because I looked at them and I said, these aren't computers,
Yeah.
because I knew what computers should be able to do. There was no screens, there were just cabinets, and there was like a typewriting machine. There was no they would type out letters on in a row. That was the only output they had.
Yeah. Yeah.
And was like, these aren't computers. I know what computers are. You talk to a computer. You have all this stuff. So my first exposure to it was very disappointing to me because, and I had no interest in computers at that time, because you talk to them with you would make up your routine, your code, and then they would turn into punch cards, and you gave the stack of punch cards. It was like, I'm not interested in that at all.
So when did this shift? What has changed?
It shifted basically 20, 75, 20 years later, or less than 20 years later, maybe 15 years later. And it shifted when there was a computer in the lab at the university where I was working, and um, uh, we get a modem to send data um, out to. I was trying to send some data to a newspaper to have it typeset, and I discovered the bulletin boards at that time, the online discussion boards. And so when we took so the computer was boring to me. I had no interest in it. But when you took the computer to the telephone, that was when it transformed it. Then it became a communications device. And that was really interesting to me, because on the other side of the plug in the wall, there was this emerging territory of people discussing things and talking about it, doing research and everything. And that felt very organic to me. It didn't feel like it was big corporate. Um, I was kind of hippie-ish. It didn't feel big, alien. It felt very, very warm and organic and human scale. And so I began to explore that. I was a travel writer basically, and I began to explore that as if it was a new country. And I wrote a story about it called The Network Nation in 1984. Um, I wrote a story. Yeah.
So, so then, like now, looking back at your career and work and life, because in your newest book, you have this profound idea about becoming, right? By the end, towards the end of your life, you become the person that you try to be. So, if you had to describe for people who don't know you, how would you describe yourself?
Wow. I would say I'm a packager of ideas. I'm more naturally an editor. I'm not naturally a writer. I don't like to write. I like to have written. And um, that first draft is really, really hard for me because writing is a kind of thinking for me. I don't know. I don't have an idea and then I can write it down. I don't have any ideas until it's the act of writing it down that gives me the idea. So I sit down and I don't know what I'm going to say, so I start to write, and the writing gives me the idea. So it's very painful because it's very slow. So I see myself as a packager, like an editor, naturally, who takes ideas, whether my ideas or other people's ideas, and try to communicate them. And the same thing with this advice book. A lot of the advice is ancient, timeless, maybe spiritual from other religions, and I have just tried to communicate it in my own words. So I'm packaging other people's ideas in some ways. Some of them are my ideas, but I mix them up both. So that's sort of what I do is package and communicate ideas.
Well, we think that you've done a great job in packaging those ideas in the latest book. So
Thank
it's
you.
called Excellent Advice for Living. And let's dive into it. So one of the things what kind of resonated with us is this idea: in 100 years, a lot of what we take to be true now will be proved to be wrong, maybe even embarrassingly wrong. So, also tying that back to your experience with technology and Wired magazine, what has been surprising for you how technologies develop? And what were the predictions, maybe embarrassing predictions, that did not turn out to be true?
Yeah, it's very difficult to predict the future, and usually I am wrong. I've been really wrong about VR, virtual reality, which I saw in the late 80s for the first time. Jaron Lanier showed me that, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything. Um, but here we are 30 years later, and the technology is not that much better, but it's several million times cheaper. So the things that Jaron did cost many millions of dollars to do, and now it's very, very cheap, but it's really not that much better. So so I've been wrong about that, and I imagine a mirror world, an AR world, where you have not a closed, separate world that you enter, but you have smart glasses that allows you to see the real world with an overlay of the digital on top. The VR world and the real world converge together, and I expect to see that, but that may take a long time. I never, again, I expected to see it beginning sooner than now. Apple still has not released their smart glasses. They keep delaying them because it's so difficult to do. And they just showed it to their internal people this last week. And they're like, I don't know. It doesn't seem really ready. So, so I've been wrong about when I expect it, how fast that comes. But that's not necessarily embarrassing. I'm not embarrassed by that. There are more, um, I guess, maybe cultural beliefs that we have that we're going to be, I think maybe in the future, um, 100 years from now, people will maybe be embarrassed. My descendants, my great, 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 great grandchildren may be embarrassed that we ate meat, that we ate flesh of animals, that we killed animals to eat. All right. So it's like, I don't know. That seems pretty barbaric. So there are those kinds of things where one of my predictions is that maybe in 200 years, people will find it kind of embarrassing that um, we let parents give us our names, that we didn't choose our own names, just like we choose our own marriage partners, that our parents would choose our names rather than let us choose our names when we were, at a certain age. Um, so there's those kinds of things that I think is possible that we could um, be wrong about in that sense. You know, I I don't think I'm wrong about AI, but I could be totally, I'm not worried about the AI singularity, the AI killing us, or even taking our jobs. I could be wrong about that. That's possible.
Yeah, that's a point that we will come to. But also speaking about AI and the field of, yeah, it's nice that you also refer to it as AIs. I think it's a very useful term to be using to clear up some misconceptions. But also when you look at this field at machine learning, because you also said a picture of ideas, do you sometimes see a monoculture? In a sense, there's this one dominant
Mm,
paradigm instead of
mm.
maybe a multiplicity of ideas.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you put it well that there is kind of a monoculture response to it, particularly about those who aren't don't know a lot about it. The response is basically, Hollywood and science fiction writers paint a very dystopian view of the future because it makes good stories. That's just a better way to tell stories. The future that works is kind of boring, and so I think you're right that there is sort of a monocultural response to AI. I think that will change once we have all the AIs that we can make and that we start to fill that world with multiple versions. People will um, have experience with various kinds and understand that there's different personalities and different jobs and different capabilities. So then I think we won't have a um, a uniform response to them. So that's just a matter of experience. And right now, at the beginning, when um, there's so few of the AIs, um, people just group them together in one bucket. Um, but people who are using them already have already, started to talk about favoring one over the other and being able to use one species for certain kind of jobs. And so I think that's just a matter of experience that will shift once people have that experience.
Yeah. So talking about experience, also you had this quote about the fact that you can't do something can be embarrassing, but if you are learning to do something, that is admirable. And there are only tiny baby steps between can't and learning. But do you think that it's also applicable to technology? Because it seems that, for example, now with ChatGPT and other technologies, that people are much more harsher to technologies. If we make any mistake, it's like a big issue.
Who's
Whereas
making the
like
mistakes, the humans or the chats?
that if technology makes mistake, we expect that it would be perfect, that it wouldn't make mistakes, and we are much more harsher to those mistakes that technology makes.
That people expect the AIs to be perfect, and they're not as forgiving of mistakes when they make it. Um, I think you're right that we do expect AIs to be perfect. I mean, like we've been trained by, say, Google to in search engines to be pretty reliable when it gives us something. But yeah, it is interesting because Google gives me useless information all the time, but we don't say that's a mistake because we're not expecting it to be useful. There's no promise that it'll always be useful. It's like correct in the sense that it is a link, it's valuable, but we don't expect it. There's no promise. The chat is promising something um, much higher, perhaps, or maybe there's a context in which it is uh, conversational, more like a human. But you're right. I have to think about that. Or what it is that we expect. Why do we expect GBT to be better than it is? Who says that it should be like that? There's no where do where do we get our expectations about Google or that? And it's I think maybe it's because it is so often really good that when it doesn't work, we're kind of surprised. I call that I call that I have a made up a word that I called dumb smartin. And dumb smartin is this idea that we're going to be very frustrated because it's going to exactly behave like this, which is like, how can you be so stupid when you're so smart otherwise? And I think that's where this is coming from. This expectation is that oftentimes it is so right that that when it isn't, we feel frustrated. Whereas in Google, when it's not useful, it's like, yeah, that's just how it is. We're not expecting anything more. But when chat is really, really right, that raises our expectation. So when it's wrong or useless, we're very disappointed and we're very frustrated because it's not consistent.
Yeah. So one more question, because you also like mentioned this like human intelligence, because for us we are also like we make mistakes, and like it's kind of normal behavior. But and many people say that we want to have like human like intelligence in these technologies, but is it actually true, or do we actually want that technologies would be much better or like way different than humans? Because if we want technologies to be like humans, wouldn't it by default should have then biases, make mistakes,
Yeah, I
right?
think it's also not as useful. The thing about making another AI like a human is um, it's more useful if we make them not like humans because then they can help us think differently, to do things that we don't want to do. So one, I think is really hard to make it like a human, almost impossible. But secondly, I think it's going to be better for us to make them different than us. So I'm pretty sure that most of these AIs are going to be different and or very different from us, and uh, they can imitate us, or they will try to imitate us, and that's what the chat bots, like for instance, like a helpline, like a tech helpline, right? So you need help. Some app where doesn't, software is not working. Your computer doesn't work, whatever it is, you want to help. And there, there is a benefit for trying to behave in a human because we're more comfortable with interacting with a human than with a robot. But it might be that we learn that uh, to not or teach ourselves to not want a human-like interaction with a help bot. Maybe we want something that is really evidently and obviously not a human. It's kind of like Spock on maybe you want Spock to help you. You don't want to think that they're a human. You know that they're not a human. They may have certain human aspects, but they're not trying to fool you into thinking that they're a human. They're just Spock and they're really going to be different. And maybe that's actually what we would prefer in having a help bot is something that's more alien in that way. We'll see. That's an experiment that we'll get to we'll get to try. I'm kind of guessing that over time we'll have more experience with different AIs and we'll understand that it's kind of like it's like having pets or animals. We like the fact that the dog is not a human. It has a dog is thinks like a dog. It has certain dog qualities. It's we can interact. We can have emotion, but there's an attraction actually to the dogness about a dog that we like, and so we may enjoy actually interacting with other kinds of intelligences that aren't human. Um, and so there may not be a need to try and imitate human intelligence all the time.
But so far, it seems that this is not the dominant sort of paradigm. It's still very much dominated by the idea that you have to maybe mimic the tasks that humans do, instead of what you are trying to say that you need to reimagine, let's say, where the technology and the human fits and how they can
Yeah,
collaborate. So,
exactly, and that's because we have no idea what human intelligence is. We just don't know, and so it's natural that the first thing we do is to try to imitate us as much as possible to help us figure out what it is. And so I see that it's kind of a natural progression where like the student painter who imitates the master, who copies the master. So human intelligence is the master intelligence right now. And then we're going to copy it first, and then we'll transcend it. Then we'll figure out that it's a good place to start, but we can be better than ourselves.
Yeah. So what is your take on this idea of super intelligence? Like that, how would you imagine that? Like about possibilities and
Yeah, I think it's a myth. I think it's again the AIs we may be superior in certain dimensions, but they can't be superior in every dimension. So um, because there's trade-offs, there's always engineering trade-offs, and so uh, it can't be godlike. It could certainly be more powerful, but that power will also have consequences or costs in some ways. Just like if you were to, we're going to make this super machine. We'll call it the super machine. This is a super machine that's powerful than any other machine, and it does what all machines do. So, like, it's better than a gasoline motor. It's more powerful than an electric drill. It's and like, well, it's very obvious that's an impossible thing. You can't have one machine that does because our machines are like there's a drill press, there's a factory loom. I mean, it's like how can one machine be better than all machines? It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. And so to say, well, and intelligences are like machines, and say we're going to have this one intelligence that's somehow superior to every other intelligence. It's like that's just an engineering impossibility.
but somehow there is a lot of discussion surrounding this idea, and it seems like I don't know. It's people like debating this, or it's because it's a very simple explanation, or
Yes,
what's the
right. No,
reason?
it's like Superman. It's a mythic idea that will never go away. Superman's impossible. But the idea of Superman, you can have arguments about it. You can imagine it. It's just a fabulous mythical idea, but it's a myth, and myths have their own kind of truth. And so the super intelligence AI is a mythical thing that's very appealing, great for stories. Um, but just like Superman can't really be, I mean, it's just ridiculous. What he's made out of like tissue, and it's like it just doesn't make any sense. So the super AI is also as ridiculous. It's just not really real. There are aspects of it like Superman that would be possible, but as a whole, the character is just not it's not feasible.
But then it somehow, this idea about super intelligence, it feeds into other related ideas. For example, alignment. It seems that it's almost like becoming a new religion for some people to be talking about
Right,
this
right, right.
and debating. At the core, it seems like a useful idea that you want a machine to be alive with the human, let's say, desires on what the human wants to do. But it sort of spirals into this kind of mythical thinking that
Right, right,
there's
right.
going to be a super intelligent AI that's going to destroy us
Yeah,
all.
I mean, we can't really have AI alignment until we have human alignment. And by that I mean is this yes, we very much want to transmit our values into machines. If they start to make decisions, which they do, there are our children. So that's the best way to think of these is that they're kind of our mind children. They're our children, and we want to train the children to have values because they're going to be making decisions on their own. So we definitely want to align them with our values. That's a very important thing, and um, it's actually not that difficult to do because it's just code. We can just write out the values in code and put it into machines. So I don't think that part is hard. I think the hard part is that we have no alignment among humans about what our values are. Okay? We don't know how to be better than us. We don't know what that means. Who's us? Better in what direction? What does that look like? So we have no code to give them. Our values have not been are very shallow. They're very inconsistent. Our ethical guidelines are very vague. And so, as we try to make them better than us, not just as racist and sexist as we are on average, it gets really hard to come to something to say, well, here's what it is, and here's what it looks like, and here's our consensus about it. And so that's what I call human alignment. We're not aligned ourselves with what that is, what the values are. So first, before we have AI alignment, we have to have human alignment, where we actually are able to articulate and to specify exactly what it means to be better than us, to have our values, and then to be better. And so that's the agenda. But once I think if we can do that, then we can easily put it into the AIs and robots and say, here's what should guide you when you have to make a decision. Here are the guidelines. Um, but that's going to take us a century to do.
Because you also have various cultures, right? And
Yeah,
how would you take that into account when you
right.
also have to, because people would have different expectations, right?
Sure.
So
Exactly. Different cultures, you've got different political stripes. You have lots of different ideas about what it means to be human to begin with, and then we want to be better than humans. No, it's a huge, huge thing. And my hope is that in that process of doing that, that we actually will become better humans ourselves, not just for our machines, but that process of kind of articulating that. We'll say, oh, why don't we act like that too?
So also like because you mentioned consequences and that indeed there is like always trade-off in any technology that you make. So many people are really concerned about like these existential risks that AI poses. So what do you think about that? Even if we don't have super intelligence, but like how realistic are those fears? And
Yeah, the fears. It's always easier to imagine how things go wrong, and because there are more ways for things to go wrong than right. I mean, that's just entropy. That's just the law of the universe. Is that the modes of failure are far, far more than the modes of success. And that's why it's really tough to be an entrepreneur or anybody else, because you're working against entropy, which is that there's far more ways for this to fail than to work. And so right now it's very easy to see all the failure modes of AI and all the things. It's harder to see those few success modes. And the problem, though, with seeing the failure modes is that when we do anything out of fear, we do stupid stuff. We don't behave well when we act out of fear. And so I see that we have a panic cycle, and I think one of the things we can remember is that there's a natural progression when seeing new technology to fear it. That we always do it. It's just how people react. And so if we understand that that's the initial reaction and that we have to pass through that and overcome that each time, every time, it's just going to be part of the cycle that people will immediately have fears about it. And we say, well, that's just the natural panic cycle, and then we'll get through it. Don't, calm down, take it slow. Um, look, we'll give you some good pictures, but don't freak out. And that's just, I think, just something we have to learn as a civilization, that is the natural progression. Is the next new thing that was invented after you were born is going to freak you out. Okay, just take it easy. Don't pass any legislation based on fear, because that will be stupid. Don't do anything too hastily because of fear, because that will be stupid. So yeah. So just take it slowly.
But so when it comes to regulation, what is the best approach? And you're saying that it's better to sort of a bit wait and see how it
Yes,
all evolves rather than over regulate.
yes. So here's the thing: is this is the marvelous thing about these. Like, just take AI as an example. Um, all the capabilities that were discovered, the inventors of this had no idea about what it really could do, both positive and negative. They just don't know. You can't think about these. You can't arrive at things by thinking about what them. You actually have to use them. And once we use them, we can actually begin to have actual data. So we want to make policies and regulation based on actual data, not an imagination of what we could imagine could happen, which is a lot of what the regulation right now is aimed at. It's people could imagine someone losing their job. How many people have actually lost their job to AI? I don't know, one, two, maybe nobody. So actually I know there's one person I know. So that's the data. So let's look at the data of actually what happens with AI and so I like evidence-based policy. And yes, that requires us to use it in order to figure out what it's good for and how it causes harm. And so, yes, that takes time. ChatGPT has been out, what, 12 days? 12 days, and people are already wanting to regulate it? That's just insane. That's just insane. It's like having a baby. It's like looking at the baby and knowing what the baby's going to do. You have no idea. So it's no. We need to have the street use. The street has to use this stuff. It's only in use that we understand what is good for and bad for. The other version, thinking, is what I call thinkism, which is this idea that people can figure out things and solve problems by thinking about them. Just people who like to think say that, but that's not true. Okay, You need so many other things. You actually need to do it in real life. You actually have to experiments. You have to do trials. You have to do studies, and you can't base it just on one study. What we know from health, and this stuff is this complicated health. What we know from health is that it takes hundreds of studies in order to actually determine really what's going on. Not one study, not two studies, not three, not five, 100. It's because things are so complicated to unravel really what's going on. So we need hundreds of studies about this. Again, the initial 3 or 4 studies I just saw today showing that people who are using the AI to write, they can write 37% faster. Coders using GPT are 55% more efficient. So okay, so there's some of the earliest data that we have. Will that be true after 100 studies? I don't know, but that's what we should make policy based on.
Because I think in Europe there is like a big trend to regulate and to invest a lot in
Of course.
like for example about these ethical issues, like all these questions and so on. It's
Yeah, that's why Europe is lagging behind in
yeah.
its innovation. Yeah, there's the precautionary principle, which is very popular in Europe, which is that you have to prove that something is not harmful before it's allowed. I mean, that's a guarantee of no progress. I advocate the proactionary principle, which is that we use activity that we through action. We learn through action. We favor it using it in order to try and steer it. So what I would say is if you're not using it, you don't get to steer. You can only steer these things by moving forward by using them. And as you use them, you get to steer them. If you try to prohibit it or outlaw it or ban it or stop it, then you don't get to steer.
So
So
talking,
Europe will not be steering this
yeah,
technology.
yeah, indeed, because now, like apparently, like of course, US, China, they are like in the leading positions. And how do you see like this landscape of technology actually evolving? Because we had like Cold War, and now it seems like it's going to like cyber war, and like perhaps it's going to be war of AIs.
Yeah, people ask me what I worry about. I worry about cyber war, cyber conflict. I think the that is something I worry about because it's very hard because we don't have any agreements worldwide on what's acceptable. Is it acceptable to interfere with the hospitals in some other nation in their hospital tech or whatever? So we don't have those, and I think that's really dangerous that we don't have agreements about the rules of cyber war and cyber conflict. But outside of that, there is this, you know, race for AI in China too, and I think this is going to be a very interesting time to see what China's going to do about these AIs, these chat AIs, because it's very hard to regulate what they say, and if you try to control them too much, they're just not useful. So this is going to be a dilemma for China. Is how are they going to try and control these? Because the genius of them, and this is what we're learning, is that you can't really control them. It's kind of curious. They have to have some amount of free will. They have to be like there's some amount of free will to decide. So anyway, I think it's unclear what these divergent paths may be with China. Um, it may be that China's decide to try and do other kinds of AI. Again, there are lots of varieties. So they may say, well, we don't want to, we're going to let the US do this kind of chat thing and we'll do self-driving cars, which require a different kind of intelligence. Back to my main point is that there are many different species. So they may focus on the species that they can control. So self-driving car doesn't have these issues about saying inappropriate things. It's just really good at driving. It doesn't want to have consciousness anyway. It's just a distraction. So there may be other kinds of things that they decide they're going to really go for, and they're not going to deal with the issues around chat.
Yeah, because there is like a lot of progress in like robotics, and then people take actual examples from nature or from some other type of intelligence, like fish, or like they kind of enhance the body and enhance the intelligence. So it's a combination, and a lot of Chinese researchers also like do these type of experiments on, especially on robotics.
Yes, yes. There are, as I said, there are thousands of species of AIs, and so not so there may be other kinds that China can excel at and become first in. And for them, self-driving electric car, if they could make one, it could be the Apple. It could be the Apple of that world. A self-driving, really good, cheap, wonderfully designed electric car. Everybody in the world could want one. They could sell it for, $15,000 or something crazy, and it would be a hit, a global hit. And that would be AI.
Yeah.
So
And what do you think about all other countries? I mean, if they're left behind, do you think it's going to bring like more inequality, or like how, yeah, how can you compete once some other countries are like ahead?
yeah, yeah. Well, it's like machines, okay? Um, just because you can make some machines doesn't mean someone else can make other machines. And so AIs is a huge territory, and it may be that and right now, so far, all the stuff that we've seen have come from synthesizing one kind of cognition out of the many, many kinds in our brain, which is pattern recognition, pattern generation. We don't have all the other nodes. We haven't synthesized symbolic reasoning, deductive reasoning, and logic. We don't know how to do that. And we also require a large language model. We require billions of data points, and these neural nets require huge, huge, huge training sets. Well, we have an existence proof in our own children that they don't need a million examples of a dog and cat to learn the difference. They can learn it with this 12. Okay, so that's a whole nother kind of AI and AI training that has yet to be invented that could be useful for something else. So there could be other countries that decide that they're going to pursue something like that for another use. And so I'm imagining, maybe there's a particular style, like, I don't know, Hungarians who are really into logic or something, and they want the logic bot, and they're really going to have a whole ecosystem in that area of really, really working on the logic bots that are just really fabulous for working with scientists and others to doing the logical proofs, to doing this or that. And so there could be an ecosystem and a community and a economy based around logic bots of some sort. I'm making this up. So so what I'm saying is that I think there's plenty of opportunities in this space for other ecosystems. And that's the crucial thing that we understand now. Silicon Valley, Hollywood, the New York Financial, Milano fashion, that there's ecosystems. You have to have a whole system of of small businesses supporting the big businesses, and people with training and schools that are generating it. And so like in China with the Shenzhen area, it's almost impossible to take that away because it's very deep. There's little tiny people across the street that just make the little screws that you need. And so same in Silicon Valley with the software, there's an ecosystem that's supporting the whole thing. And um, other places in the world, I think, are going to specialize. Like if you should try to be Silicon Valley or Shenzhen, those are already taken. You've got to do something else. Maybe it's electric cars, or maybe it's you know, Japan. Japan loves robots. Maybe they, in the end, actually succeed in making the robots for the world. We'll see. There's health. There's health technology, which is incredibly valuable, and nobody is really taking that over. But yeah, robotic surgery, it's a whole other thing than anything else. So anyway, I think there's still plenty of room for other expertise in the
Yeah.
world.
So going back to where we started, because you mentioned what one of your predictions was about the virtual reality, and actually didn't come true. And you actually have a nice quote in your book that you say, like, every breakthrough is at first laughable and ridiculous. And in fact, if it did not start out laughable and ridiculous, it is not a breakthrough. So now we have, like, for example, this metaverse, and we had like a big hype, and then a lot of people criticize it. But do you actually think that that prediction that you have about virtual reality, or now like this metaverse, that actually it can create like a different uh, well, it could have a different societal impact, and that it can create like different type of relationships that we have, and that it can still change the way we interact.
Yes, in my um, exposures to little bits of the laboratory work and the startups, it is very clear that if we can bring this to the average person um, for cheap, um, that it will make a huge dent. So for, I don't know, 30 years, I've been using teleconferencing and um, talking about, that's kind of virtual reality. And very few people believed that that would actually work until the pandemic and everybody went to COVID. And suddenly it's like obvious. Look what we're doing right now. Okay. So, um, yes, this we know if we could do this even better, if we could have 3D. One of the things we know from testing, one of the things I know is that if you are present and I am present to you in 3 dimensions, that there is something weird that happens in our brains to convince you that I am really there. So even if I don't look exactly the same, even if I'm slightly cartoony, you feel somebody is really there. There may be a cartoon character, but that presence is there, again, in the same way that right now you think my hand is moving, but you're not seeing any movement. You're just seeing still images replaced by one still image after another, and your brain is saying there's movement. In the same way, you see this 3D thing, and your brain is telling you there's somebody there, even though logically you know that there's nobody right there. And so yes, my experience with this is that yes, this is going to be very powerful presence, telepresence, and that will have a huge difference on how people work and do stuff. And that ability to have another person sit next to you and you feel that they're really there, it changes how you work, and it's going to make a huge difference. Um, just as having Zoom has made this huge difference already. People are not good. People are not. Google keeps saying you must come back to work or you'll be fired, and the workers say, "Okay, fire me." And Google says, "Well, okay, maybe you come back 1 day a week or you'll be fired." And they'll say, "Okay, well, fire me." And so it's like it works so well that it's going to be very hard to kind of go back. So yes, this stuff that I've seen has the potential. The question is, how long would it take to get there? Where's it come? I think at first the smart glasses that people have will be worn mostly at work first for most people, and not and actually and first for people who don't have desk jobs, people who are in warehouses or doing repair work or in the field. That's where they're first going to be used mostly, and it'll gradually migrate into offices. But you can have a screen anywhere you want. It's powerful. The problem is that technically it's really hard to do. It's hard to get enough field of vision. Is really hard. The refresh rate is hard. The contrast is so technically it's very hard to do. It's not advanced enough, and so it's going to be decades before the technology catches up. It's kind of like, we, this is actually not hard to imagine because we had Star Trek in some senses, a communicator, but it just took many years to make the technology good enough and the infrastructure. And that's with the VR, AR world, the metaverse. It's just technically very, very difficult to do at scale. And so I don't see it happening next year, year after. It's
Yeah.
decades.
So what excites you the most about the future of technology? What kind of breakthrough you would actually like to
Mm.
see if you?
Oh yeah, well there's a couple um, outside that. I mean, fusion, synthetic solar fusion, nuclear fusion, fusion energy would be fantastic. They're getting close, maybe within my lifetime. I went to visit Neuralink and I saw the monkeys controlling the computers with their brain, not just going
Yeah.
directly to brain. I don't want to have an implant. I'm not going to have an implant. But there's other forms of a hat that you wear that uses light into your brain, and so that's a lot closer than I thought. I thought that was 100 years away, and I would say that's 25 years away. Um, as a person who doesn't eat mammals, I'm really really interested in having lab meat, animal cell based meat. So not just plant based, but you know, uh, deathless meat they call it sometimes. Um, that's happening it's happening pretty fast, but that would be really, really great. I'm looking forward to that. Um, so there's lots of things that are happening that I think, you know, flying cars. I don't think. I think that's way away. My son-in-law and others work on flying cars. I think that's going to be a way. Although drone delivery could happen soon. So anyway, there's a bunch of things happening.
Yeah. So many exciting things.
Yeah. So I know I have just a few minutes, and I want to remind people this is my advice, excellent advice for living, wisdom which I had known earlier, and the kinds of advice kind of advice I would give to like a 20-year-old. This is what I would say in the book. I say, if at all possible, try to work in an area where they don't have a name for what it is that you're doing, and don't be the best, be the only. So working with somewhere where there's no name for what it is helpful to help you be at the place where there's a breakthrough or innovation and you don't have competition. And then secondly, I would say if you're in your 20s, if at all possible, not everybody can do it, but if at all possible, spend a bunch of time, a year, maybe more or less, doing something that is strange, crazy, unpredictable, unexpected, dangerous, weird, out there, a waste of time, unprofitable, that looks nothing like success. And that experience will become later on your touchstone for a great life. And so, you know, don't head off to your career right away. Take some time to try and do something that looks nothing like success.
So would these be your favorite pieces of advice? Because we really wanted to ask
Yeah,
that.
well, don't try to be the best, be the only, and work on trying to find out what it is that you can do differently or better than most people, and that's a very high bar. That's something you can't find out. Weirdly, um, becoming the only person who can do it requires everybody around you to help you arrive there. So it's a kind of a paradox that it takes a lot of people to help you become an individual. And You need family, friends, customer, clients, the public to help you see who you're becoming, to help you on your journey to become yourself. And it's a lifelong journey. And most people, like including myself, your path is going to be full of detours and right turns and setbacks and overcoming.
It's not a straight line
Not a
up.
straight line. It's a meander.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about where you begin. It doesn't matter where you begin because that's not where you're going to end. You want to master something. So this journey of trying to become the best you can be um, is a lifelong journey. There is no destination. There's only kind of a direction, and so it will take your time, but you can work towards that at all stages of your life. Um, and the most remarkable people that I know, they may have $1 billion, but that $1 billion does not answer this question. They're still asking, "What do I want to do when I grow up?" And that's good. It's good that they're asking that question. So, yeah.
Yeah, this is timeless and excellent advice, really. And I think this is a nice note to end on with this profound, actually, message.
Well, thank you. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
interest in my book and my work. I appreciate your attention, which is the only scarcity we have. So thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.